Hey, Charles here with Rocky Mountain, and today I'm going to show you how to rebuild KYB SSS Forks. These are also known as AOS forks from KYB. They're basically the twin chamber forks, and you can verify what you have by looking at the cap. There's going to be an inner and an outer cap, and these ones happen to come off our 2023 YZ450F, but they've been around since 2006, and not only do they come on Yamaha dirt bikes, but they've also been on some Hondas, Kawasaki's, some Shercos, and even some gas bikes. So whatever bike these came off of, we're gonna show you how to do the rebuild process and show you some common fail points. So that said, let's go ahead and get started. To get this done, we've got some common hand tools, including a torque wrench, 22, 19, 17, 10, and 8mm sockets, a Tusk hex axle tool, 15 and 14mm combo wrenches, some screwdrivers, picks. We've got a clip pick tool right here. And then we're moving on to some special tools. So I want to mention we're using a vise with some soft jaws specifically for suspension to get this done. We're also going to need a 48mm fork seal driver. We've got a seal bullet, and we've got some tools for the fork cap. So we've got the inner cap tool and the outer. The outer is also going to have a damping rod holder built into the end. So those are your must-have tools right there. We also have a drain pan. We've got a measuring cup, a heat gun. This is not required, but can make some things easier. And then you're also gonna wanna have some safety glasses, rubber gloves, rags. And of course, we're always using a little bit of thread locker, and we've got some seal grease. Now, throughout the process, you know, our bike's a 23, but you wanna refer to your model specific service manual, because these forks, they've gone through some revisions over the years. So you want to take a look at your specific manual for capacities and for torques. Now for parts, there's levels to this depending on what you need to do. If you're just replacing your fork seals, you're going to need your fork and dust seal kit. You can buy them individually if you want as well. We're going with the Pro X set today, but if you want the SKFs or OEM seals, Tusk, all balls, anything like that, we've got lots of options on our website. And we're going with the Bel-Ray 5-weight fork oil. You're gonna need 2 bottles, and we also have some contact cleaner. Now let's go ahead and look at some of the parts that you may wanna get at the same time. So right here we have a complete fork bushing kit. It comes with all this stuff. And these bushings, you don't have to replace them out every time, but if you have a lot of hours on your bike, you definitely wanna get one of these kits, because if these are worn out, your seals usually will start leaking again right after you put them in, just because there's too much play in there. So I highly recommend having one of these sets on hand. This one's from Tusk. It comes with all these O-rings, the copper washers, retaining clips, and the wear rings. But we have several different options on the website. Now, these Zeta free pistons, these are something you need to know about if you have these SSS or AOS forks. So the 2017 and older models, they had issues with the stock ones breaking. They're just plastic, and the update was they have windows in them now, and that prevents those things from breaking. But if you have an older model, definitely get these replaced while you're in there. We're gonna be doing a separate video. And if you need any parts for your fork rebuild, you can find that stuff on our website by clicking the link in the description below. The first step is to remove your wheel, your caliper, and your forks from the bike. All right, now that we have the forks off the bike, what we need to do is remove our fork guard down here. And even though we power washed everything before we ever pulled these off the bike, they're still a little grimy. So we're gonna wipe them down, and we're also gonna inspect the tube for any nicks. All right, now that we have these cleaned up, I just want to talk about 3 things that can cause fork seals to leak. So one of those is going to be a nick in your tube. You could have had a rock come up and hit this and scratch it up. It could be sand in the seal itself, and then you could have worn out bushings. So we're going to check for the obvious stuff real quick. And on this fork, we actually did find a couple nicks down towards the bottom. Now, once they get to be that low, sometimes if they're low enough, that fork seal might never hit it, but if you see that anywhere along there, you want to get it repaired before you go back together. Next, before we take anything apart, we need to record where our clickers are in their settings. We're going to turn these in clockwise until they lightly seat. We'll count the clicks in and then back them out all the way counterclockwise. We're going to do this for the compression and rebound adjusters. And then on this fork itself, we're going to remove this quick adjuster. Next, we can loosen up this fork cap if you haven't already done it on the bike. And before I take it out all the way, there's the inner cap, and we want to make sure we have new oil going in that inner chamber. So it's honestly probably easiest to loosen this up right now as well. Completely loosen that outer cap. And then when you hear it click like that, it means it's all the way out. So we can now take this out of the vise and we're going to dump our oil. And if you want, you can put this upside down in the vise for a minute and let it drain all of that oil out into your drain pan. Then once you've drained most of that oil out, you want to temporarily reinstall your cap. Then I'm going to clamp that axle lug. In my soft jaws, I've got this rag here for extra protection, and we're going to loosen up that center bolt. Just make sure you have your drain pan underneath this when you do it, because some oil will be coming out. All right, so our fork cap tool has the damping rod holder built right into it. So all we need to do now is press down on our cap. Damping rod's going to come out, and we'll slide this behind that center bolt nut. Now we can break the center nut free. Then we'll remove the center bolt. There's going to be a little push rod in here. Pull that out. And I'm just laying everything out in order. And if you got any dirt on your work surface, make sure you have that wiped down before you start laying parts on there. I'm going to press down on the cap one more time. Pull my holding tool out. And then we need to loosen up this cap. And we're going to pull this inner cartridge out. And just keep in mind, you might lose a little bit of fork oil. So you can make sure you have a drain pan over here or a couple rags underneath to catch anything. So we've got that inner chamber out. I'm going to slide this down, and we still need a little more to go to get that spring out. So I'm going to dump this out over a drain pan and pull the spring. And just pay attention. I always like to put a finger over or in the middle just to make sure any preload washers don't fall out. Make sure you keep track of that stuff. Next, we're going to remove our dust seal. So I'm just using a small flat blade screwdriver. We're just going to pop that off. Slide it down, and then there's going to be a clip inside this outer tube. At this point, you can use this outer tube like a slide hammer to pull everything apart. One thing that you can do to help you out and make it easier and avoid damaging the bushings that are in this is use a heat gun. You can warm this area up, or for us, we're going to be using a torch. And with that off, we're going to start by removing these bushings. So you can split these with your fingernail, or you can use a screwdriver if that's easier for you. And again, we're just laying everything out in order. So we've got the bushing for the outer tube. We've got a backup ring, and this is going to look different from model to model. So there's some that it's going to be more of a spacer. And we've got our oil seal. And pay attention to the orientation as you pull that off. We've got our retaining clip. And last but not least, we have our dust seal. And I'm going to remove this lower tube. And before I start cleaning everything up, we're going to get some fresh fluid in this cartridge. All right, now for this cartridge, we're going to remove this spring support. And then before you take this apart, you want to verify that everything was working correctly. So I'm just going to press in on the damping rod, and I'm gonna let it extend on its own. If it doesn't extend all the way, if you can pull this and then feel it stop, it means you have air inside the system, and most likely you've got a bad seal at the bottom, or it could be up at the top. But as long as it extends all the way, you're gonna be able to simply replace this fluid. And how you do that is we're just gonna gently support this in our vise with our soft jaws. I'm just barely clamping down. You don't wanna bend anything. And then we're gonna use the two fork cap tools to remove this inner cap and that compression assembly. And with that loosened up all the way, I'm gonna press up on my damping rod as I pull this up. That's gonna allow it to come out easier. And we can take this cartridge out of the vise, and we're gonna dump all the oil into our drain pan. And as we do that, I'm just gonna pump it up and down. And that's gonna get the rest of the oil out. Now, if the fluid in there looks really nasty, you can flush it out with some fresh fork oil. And if you see, if it almost looks like there's metallic flakes inside of there, it probably means the anodizing on the inside of this tube is worn out, and you're either gonna have to get it re-anodized or replace the assembly. The next thing I'm gonna do is install my Zeta free piston on here. Now, I know this is a newer bike and we really wouldn't have to upgrade this, but we're gonna have peace of mind with that aluminum piston in here. You'll need to remove your base valve. We have a separate video that shows how to do that. Now back to the inner chamber. I'm gonna wipe out these threads on the inside, make sure they're clean. Going to reinstall this back into the soft jaws. Now when we fill this with oil, we need to make sure that we don't have any air inside of here, and that way all the shims and everything can do their job correctly. So as we do this, we need to make sure that we have this piston assembly on the base valve fully submerged in oil. So there's some measurements that the manual is going to give you. So for our bike, we're going to measure out 216 milliliters. We're gonna bleed the air out, and we should be good from there. They also give you a measurement. You can measure from the top and take out any extra oil. You always wanna err on the side of having more oil in here to make sure you don't have any air. If not, you're gonna have to redo the job. But the only problem with having too much oil is it's gonna be hard to put the base valve in. So that's why we're doing our measurements. But if for some reason you don't have access to a manual, I do want to point out that you can kind of eyeball this thing and just make sure that you're going to have oil high enough to have these pieces fully submerged. So as I pour this in, I'm just covering the two holes on the sides just so I don't lose any out of there. And just for reference, when we measured this out, it's sitting right about here. And at this point, we need to start the bleeding process. So we're going to move the damping rod up and down. We're going less than 8 inches, and that way we make sure we don't introduce any air into the system. We're gonna do this about 10 times. You can hear all the bubbles coming out. It's also not a bad idea to let that fluid sit for a minute, let any bubbles work to the top. And then this step, normally I don't do, but if you wanted to be exact, you can use one of these oil level gauges, suck out any excess oil. And the spec on our bike is just 145 millimeters from the top. So we had a little bit of extra in there. That's gonna make it really easy to install the base valve. Okay, next step is to install the base valve. And to do that, I'm gonna push the damping rod all the way up. I've got the lock nut at the bottom. That's all the way threaded on into place. Now we're gonna drop the base valve in. As I do that, I'm covering up these two side holes. There's probably gonna be a little bit of oil that comes out. And as you set this in place, make sure that this O-ring on the cap, it's not torn or cut. This one's looking good. Got my drain pan underneath. I'm gonna use that inner fork cap tool to help install this. So at this point, I'm gonna start pushing this into place, and I'm just keeping the holes covered, but there's gonna be some oil that comes out. So we've got that pressed down into place. We'll go ahead and thread the base valve on. And then with this, you can check the torque spec in your manual. The main thing is you don't want to over tighten this. We're just going to snug it up. Wipe off some of that excess oil. I'm going to pump the damping rod up and down a few inches for a final bleed. Again, make sure that the jam nut is threaded all the way on. The last thing we need to do is bleed out any excess oil. So again, oil is going to come out of these holes, so I'm just going to keep them covered up. We're pressing this down all the way. And then from here, we want to make sure the shaft extends all the way on its own. If you can pull it out any further, it means you either didn't get air all the way out of the system, or you didn't have the oil level high enough when you installed the base valve. Then we need to drain any extra oil that we just bled out. That's going to come out of these side holes. If you have any questions that you have a bad seal down here, one thing you can do is press this halfway down. Obviously make sure this is clean, but hold it here for a minute, and if you see oil leaking out, then you know you've got a bad seal. So we don't have anything leaking out. Again, this damping rod is extending all the way, so we can move on with our fork rebuild. We're gonna go ahead and clean up the rest of the parts. And I do wanna point out, as you clean everything up, around the threaded areas, a lot of times it's gonna be kind of dirty. So especially at the bottom of these lugs. So make sure all of that stuff is cleaned out really well. All right, now on this outer tube, you can see we have this wear ring and the bushing kit that we got came with a new one. This one's worn flat. Sometimes people rotate these to make them last longer, but at some point that wear ring wasn't doing its job. We're kind of worn into the fork right there. So you want to make sure this thing is in good condition. We'll go ahead and replace it. There's a little bit of dirt under there. Make sure it's wiped out. And we'll get this new one on. That's just going to keep that fork guard from wearing down the tube. All right, moving on with inspections. So most of the time, these O-rings and the copper washer, all that stuff is probably going to be in good condition. And a lot of times you can reuse it. But again, our bushing kit came with a lot of the new parts. So we've gone ahead and swapped them out. Now, as far as these bushings go, the main thing you're looking for is this Teflon coating. So that gray coating, you want it to be visible all the way around. If you see any spots where it's worn through, you're gonna see a copper color, and that's gonna indicate that it's time to replace it. Or if you see any other wear, scratches, things like that. So this other bushing, the Teflon's gonna be on the inside. We will take a look at that as well. And then we've got the new retaining clips that came with these. Now, one of the most important inspections we're gonna be doing is to the fork tube. We already talked about this earlier at Disassembly, making sure there's no nicks or dings or anything like that. But with everything cleaned up, we're just gonna give it one last visual. And we did have that area we wanna clean up down here. So I'm gonna be using a small file to clean that up, but you could use a little bit of Scotch-Brite or emery cloth or fine sandpaper, 600 grit sandpaper as well. Okay, and then you'll know it's cleared up when the file doesn't catch on it anymore, you can run your finger across just to verify, and then make sure you get this cleaned up really well. You don't want any little shavings left behind. And if for some reason, if you find one that's really bad, you might just want to replace the tube. All right, with everything cleaned up and inspected, we're ready to go back together. So we're gonna start by installing this axle lug into our vise. Then you can use a plastic bag or even some painter's tape to cover up these sharp edges for when you install the seals, but a seal bullet is definitely the easiest and best way to go. So we're gonna slide that down into place, and that's just gonna make sure we don't tear the seals as they go on, because those corners where the bushing rides, they're super sharp. So now I'm gonna take the new dust seal. I'm going to apply a little bit of seal grease inside on these lips. We'll slide this down into place. The retaining clip, we're gonna wait until the seals are driven into place. So the next one we have is the oil seal. Now, as far as orientation goes, on this particular brand of seal, this one's the Pro X, it's got a garter spring on both sides. So this open back, it's gonna be facing up once everything's assembled. The other way you can tell, you've got a thicker lip and a second lip that's gonna be facing the oil. So the double lip, that's gonna be up. And then you've got that single lip that's gonna help keep dust, dirt, that kind of thing out. That's gonna be facing down. So now we can slide that into place. Remove the seal bullet. Now for the backup ring, depending on what your bike you have, this could look different. So ours is pretty much just a washer and we can slide it right on. And we've got the bushing for the outer tube. I've got some oil on it. And we have this bushing for the inner tube, and we're just gonna spread it a little bit as we pop that on. Now you can take your outer tube, slide that down into place. I'm gonna use my fork seal driver. I slid this bushing up. I've got the backup ring. We're just gonna make sure that's fully seated. So you hear that pitch change. We know that bushing's all the way in. And one of the main reasons you wanna do that is sometimes these backup rings, if you don't do that first, they can bend as you install the seal. So just be aware of that. And then this outer tube, if you wanna heat it up, it's gonna help the seal go in a little bit easier. Most people, I'd recommend just using a heat gun or even a hair dryer, but we're gonna use this torch, using a little bit of oil on my seal driver. And then with this, as you drive it in place, you're gonna hear the pitch change and you'll know it's fully seated, just like that. So if you don't heat it up, it's probably gonna take a couple harder hits, but that's how easy it is with the heat. Even though we heard the pitch change, we're gonna do a visual inspection and just make sure that the groove for the retaining clip is fully exposed. As long as it is, you're good to go. So with these, you can just expand them, and I'm keeping my thumbs over the end just to make sure I don't scratch this tube. With that clip most of the way in, I'm gonna press it the rest of the way with my clip pick tool. You heard it snap into place. It's a good idea to just verify and go all the way around. Make sure it's fully seated in its groove. And that one actually wasn't, so it's a good thing we checked. Then from here we can press the dust seal in. So a lot of times these will press in fairly easy. If it doesn't go in easy, you can use a soft face mallet to kind of tap it in, or take the axle holder out of the vise and then press the fork tube all the way down. It'll pop right in. All right, now I'm gonna push this outer tube most of the way down. Next, we have our springs. So preload is really important with these. and we've done other videos that talk about setting up preload if you're changing your springs out. But with this, typically you're going to want your washers or spacers sitting at the bottom. On this one, they can sit top or bottom, whichever you want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and drop these in. I'm just going to look down in there, make sure they are seated. So we're looking good. And we've got our spring. Then we've got our spring perch. Slide that back on. And then from here we can install the cartridge assembly. And again, I've said this a few times already, but make sure the jam nut is backed off all the way. Going to slide that outer tube up. That's just going to help stabilize everything. Make sure we're pushing square. So we'll set our holder in place. Got that push rod. Slide that up in there. Then we have the center bolt. So with this, you want to make sure it bottoms out all the way. So right there, it bottoms out, and we have a small gap in between the bolt and the jam nut. That's exactly what you want. If you don't see that, it means that the jam nut wasn't backed off all the way. So can't stress that enough. It's really important to make sure this goes back together correctly. So at this point, we can go ahead and tighten these two pieces together. So the spec on our bike is 21 foot-pounds. Then on these threads, I'm just using some low strength thread locker. I'm gonna remove the tool, and we're gonna torque this to 41 foot-pounds. From here, we can remove our fork from the vise, and we're ready to add some oil. So the range of adjustability on our specific fork is gonna be 260 milliliters all the way up to 365. Standard is gonna be 270, and we're actually just going 275 on this one. And the whole thing with the fork oil, the more you put in, the more progressive it's going to feel towards the end of the stroke, mid to end of the stroke. So if you have an issue with the fork bottoming out, you can add some oil or add more oil to help prevent that. With that poured in, slide that outer tube up, and I'm going to go ahead and snug that down in our soft jaws. But again, you can do the final tightening in your triple clamps if you need to. And with the cap, you just need to snug it up. Then on top, we've got our compression adjuster. Now at this point, we're going to reset our clickers to those settings that we wrote down earlier. I'm going to wipe off any residual oil and install my fork guard. All right, now that we have this fork done, we can go ahead and do those same exact steps on the other fork. After that, you can reinstall your forks into your bike. The upper pinch bolts on ours are going to be 15 foot-pounds. Then we'll reinstall our wheel and our brake caliper. All right, that's it for rebuilding your KYB SSS Forks or AOS forks, depending on what bike you have. Now, with that said, if you have any questions, leave those down in the comments below. And if you need any parts for your fork rebuild, you can find those on our website. Orders over $75 ship free. And hey, if you want to see more helpful content, make sure you check out our channel. We've got a fork alignment video on there where we show you how to properly install an axle. That's really important for your forks to be working properly. So go check that out and other videos like it, and subscribe while you're there. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.